Alright, welcome to the Maya 2 notes for Video Game Art and Design 2020 to 21. So today we are moving into learning about Extrude, which is a tool that allows you to generate new geometry from your existing geometry, as well as the channel box, which is just a very basic fundamental editor in Maya that we want to start getting ourselves exposed to. So we're going to start today with learning what an extrude is. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new blank document. And an extrude is simply when you take existing geometry, so in this case, some faces on this sphere, okay, and you generate new geometry from the existing model. So I have these faces selected. Extrude is the one that looks sort of like a pillar coming out of a plane. And when you click that, what you'll see is you get what we call the Extrude manipulator. So for those of you keeping score at home, this looks a lot like our regular basic tool set that we just learned about in our last set of notes. So our moves tool, our scale tool, and our rotate tool. And that is because the Extrude manipulator allows you to control all three of those basic functions in a way that is unique from the basic tools. So let me explain what that means. So Extrude is what we call a local manipulator, which means whatever you do to the Extrude manipulator happens to all of your selected stuff locally. To say, if I'm editing from the center point of this face, it's also editing it from the center point of this face. So it is basically duplicating the same effect across all of your selected faces from that same point. So as you can see here on this face, I have the manipulator here. So if I pull out on this arrow, you will see that all of the other faces I had selected also are moving out forward, but from their location on the actual sphere. So let me undo that. If I use just the move tool, they're all moving in the world's space together rather than straight forward out from their actual faces. So that is the difference between the extrude move and a regular move. And the same thing holds true for the other ones. When you rotate, you're rotating all of these locally on the x-axis from their location. And some of these, they're going the other direction, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. But like this one, I don't know why. But same thing. The most important one probably, though, is the scale tool. So if I click the scale cubes, you'll see the center of this becomes a scale manipulator, which is cool because as I scale the center to the center of this face, it's also scaling to the center of all those other faces. And then I could extrude again and then pull these out. Now I have nice, thinner little spikes coming out. And so how do we get to it? The extrude tool is on the poly modeling shelf. It looks like this. Also, it's under edit mesh, extrude, command E. I typically don't use the command though, or control E if you're on a Windows computer. So with the extrude scaler, I can also scale towards the center of this, and now I made little tiny spikes. Right? So that is the very, very bare bones basics of what an extrude is. So if we flip back over to our notes and review this, an extrude is the fancy way of saying it is creating new faces along the boundary of our currently selected faces. It's just a way of saying makes new faces from where you selected the faces. So I'm going to jump chain down to undo poly extrude there in the fourth row rather. So as I alluded to at the beginning, Extrude is a fundamental basic tool of Maya, but it does have a lot of room for error in user error. And what I mean by that is when you extrude, so I'm going to go over here. So when you hit that extrude button, you've done the extrude. The extrude has been made. Okay, it doesn't require you to actually drag anything or do anything with the extrude manipulator. And so you'll see that when I go into object mode, you can see that face, for whatever reason, stands out on my sphere. And now the reason why it is doing that is because there's actually faces that are invisible that are inside of that object, right? So these are the faces from that extrude. So when you undo an extrude, so I'm going to hit Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, until down here it's telling me, and I would zoom in if I could, but it doesn't work with zoom, ironically, is it says undo poly extrude down here. So hopefully you can see that. I have it blown up on the notes, but at the bottom of your screen in the status line or status bar, whatever they call that, you should see it say undo poly extrude, and that will mean that the faces are no longer there. So if I grab this and push it out, you can see it's deforming the object. So I've undone my extrude. So again, make sure that you are double checking that you've fully undone your extrudes. Get this habit through your head now. You don't want to have to get this habit later down the line when you've been making errors for like a month in this class, and then you start trying to turn in qualitatively graded work and you have broken extrudes all over the place, and I have to explain to you, you're not being careful with your extrudes. So I say all of that to warn you now. This is the easiest thing that you can get into a bad habit in this early on in the year, right? So make sure you're measuring twice, cutting once, aka make sure that you undo your extrude. Now, final things. I do want to point out about this. We will be using this keep faces together off option today. However, it is not something you're going to commonly use. Okay, I do want to point out what it does so that you can understand maybe in the future when you might need to use it, but it is one of those less than 5% tools. You're not going to use it very often. So by default, when you extrude, it does what we call keep faces together on, which means that extruded faces that form a contiguous area only create new faces along the outmost faces' edges. That is a fancy way of saying it keeps the faces together when they extrude, which is to say, so if I grab these 4 faces here, whoops, not this one, and I extrude, you will see that they move as one group. So I pull them out like this. They're all one big plateau, so to speak. And also, if I delete this, you'll see there's no additional faces inside. So it moved them out as one big lump, right? Now, let's contrast that with keep faces together off. So again, the default is on. 95% of the time you want it on, you will never touch it. So let's say for what we're going to do today, you end up needing it. So what that looks like, so I have these 4 faces selected, I'll hit extrude. And then this little extrude box that pops up, I'm just going to tap keep faces together. Oh, hold on, let me pull this out. So right there, we're used to this. I turn keep faces together off, and you'll see that they all split apart. And so essentially it's treating it as 4 different extrudes happening simultaneously, right? That's really the difference between keep faces together on and off. Keep faces together on, they treat the faces as one gestalt extrude operation, or, connected. I don't know what an excellent synonym is for gestalt, but whereas when you do keep faces together off, it's 4, whatever number of separate extrude operations happening simultaneously. Now, again, reminder, you basically never use that. I'm going to show you today an example where that is useful, but your mileage may vary. Okay, so that is the odds and ends of extrude. Essentially, all you need to know about extrude is when you select the face and hit extrude, it makes new faces, and that if you do that, you better be sure you need those faces because they will stay there permanently. So if you don't need them, you need to undo them. Alright, so I'll take a quick pause before I jump into the other stuff, which should be pretty quick. And then, so I want to answer any questions about the extrude stuff first. So you can either drop them in the chat, or you can, unmute. I have my AirPods in so I can hear you. So anything, I'll just take a brief. Okay. I take abject silence. The extrude shortcut went away for me. So it's possible Make sure that you are 1 on the poly modeling tool, and 2 that you might need to scroll your poly modeling shelf, because it has a tendency to get scrolled away from the top part of it for whatever reason. I do it all the time, so make sure, Zane, that it's scrolled up. And then if you don't see it there, like if it just got deleted from your shelf, I can show you how to put that back later. But I'm assuming it's because it either got scrolled down or you're just not on the poly modeling shelf. How do I select a single face? How do you select on multiple faces? Okay, let's do it. So first things first, remember your selection mode menu. So holding right click. So you would want to go to face mode, and then you can select a single face by clicking on it. And then so it didn't get scrolled down. And then yeah, so as Aiden says, holding shift and clicking on faces will add them to your selection. So Zane, for now, use edit mesh and extrude from here, and I'll get back to you about the button thing later today. But we should be able to just reset your shelves and fix that. Okay, so let's move on to the final stuff so that we can just get into what we came here to do, which is make some simple crates with Extrude. So first thing I want to show you guys is the channel box. So the channel box you may have stumbled upon on the right side of your screen. It has translate XYZ, rotate XYZ, scale XYZ listed on the right side of your screen. It is a tab listed as channel box layer editor, and it is also this icon at the top right of the screen that looks like a stack of 3 papers essentially. So with that, let me delete my example that I have here, and I'm going to make a fresh cube, right? So this cube is a 6-sided object. It has 6 faces on it because it has a face for each side. So what if I wanted more faces because I want to make some extrudes? Hint, you will be doing this soon. Hint. So I have my object selected in object mode. It is a primitive that I have not edited in any way. Are we adding divisions? Yes. So keep in mind, I want to point out this is a primitive I just made. I didn't edit anything else about it, which is important to note because if you edit things, it will not like what I'm about to do. So I'm selected in object mode. I have my channel box open, and you should see an inputs that says the name of your object. So in my case, it's pcube1, so it says polycube1. So I'm going to click on polycube1, and it will give me some settings for my object that I can edit. Now, again, this is something, these primitive values are things that you can only change right after you've made the primitive. If you go back and edit these later, it will get very upset with you. And I will show you what that looks like in a second. So in my case, I'm going to change the subdivisions to 7. And you'll notice that I just clicked and dragged down the 3 channels, and it made it so that I can edit the bottom one. I typed 7 and enter, and it changed all of them to 7. Now, here's what I want to show you. So if I go, here, let me do this. So I'll select some of these, and some of these, and some of these. Okay. Let's say I got all these faces selected, right? And I extrude. So now if I go back and edit my polycube subdivisions for my primitive and change them down to 4, that's what's going to happen. So that's why you can't edit these after you've done things to your model, right? So that's really all there is to point out. Just like that thing that I just clicked on to edit the numbers for the number of faces, you can only do that right after you made the primitive. We will be learning on Wednesday how to add edges after you've already created the object. I promise you it is coming. I promise you it is coming. Just wait until Wednesday. So that is the 3rd leg of the tripod. Now the channel box is great because we can control things like translate, rotate, and scale. Sorry, that's one thing I forgot to go over. So if I want to rotate this 45 degrees, that's not a problem. 45 degrees on the X, sure. 100 or let's do 135 on the Z. Excellent. Let's scale this up 3 times. Cool. Translate it up 5 units on the Y. Sounds good. Translate it 5 units on the X. Okay. So that's where you can edit an object's values with precision. And I must stress objects. You cannot do this with faces or edges or vertices. These are object channels. Okay, so I'm selected in object mode. I can change all these. And you know what's great is I can select all of these and hit 0 and hit this scale down to 1. Oops. And now we're right back where we were. All right, so there we go. Now, when you're working with the channel box, it might be handy to know that your axes are labeled with the actual world or their relation to which axes they actually are. So the red arrow on your manipulator, or red ring, or red cube, always corresponds to X. Green always corresponds to Y. And navy blue always corresponds to Z. Now, and the final one being baby blue is all axes, and yellow is active, which I'll cover in a second. But X, Y, and Z, red, green, blue. X, Y, Z, red, green, blue. Right? Let's pop in here. So if on my move tool, my X-axis is the direction of the red arrow. The Z-axis is the direction of the blue arrow. The Y-axis is the direction of the green arrow. I will note there is some context to these things. What direction, how it's measuring that axis. Is it the object's x-axis or is it the world's x-axis? All of that is coming down the line. All I need to know right now is that those correspond to an axis. Same thing for scale. Scale X, scale Z, scale Y. For the rotate tool, whoops, same thing. So this is why I like to point this out here. So you can just hit E for the rotate tool and see, okay, this axis here is Y. So I want to rotate this 45 on the Y. Okay. I don't want to spin this way. So I'm going to 45 on that one. You see. So you can use it to inform your decisions to edit channels. And finally, so you can see there's a ring around the outside. That is for controlling all of the axes simultaneously. You can see all of my values editing over here. I do not suggest you use that ever. So controlling all 3 axes rotation at one time is typically a no-no. Typically not something you should do. That being said, with the move tool, we will talk about the appropriate times to move from the center of the move tool in the near future, but not the super near future. But there is a time and a place for you to move in all 3 axes using this. Typically, like I said the other day, I believe, you want to adopt a one-directional point of view when, or 1 to 2 dimensional point of view when moving things. So, all that being said, the scale tool, scaling from the center is actually really useful. So, we already covered that in the last one. So, okay. So we got all that. So I show you all of that to show you this. Okay, so here is the thing that I encourage everyone to follow along. So I said that I am not collecting this, and that is true. So here's what I will say to you. Practicing this is a good way to be prepared for the rest of the year, because you will use this tool on every assignment that I give you for the rest of the year. Is everyone understanding that? This tool you will use every day that you are in my class, essentially. So you should practice, is what I'm saying. So let's learn 2 methods that we can use what we just learned to create very simple crates, as I call them. They're really just extruded cubes, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to start with a basic primitive cube. So this is method number 1. So I'm going to actually pause for a quick second. Okay. So back at it. So 2 methods, right? This is method number 1. This is where we are going to use our subdivisions in our inputs for our object to help us create what we need to make the crate shape that we're going for. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a bunch of faces. No, because Extrude adds new faces, to answer the question that you asked. So in object mode, I have it selected. And then again in the channel box under inputs, I should see polycube, whatever number it is. And my subdivisions, I am in this case, changing to 7 by 7 by 7. Okay, so there's 49 faces on each side of my crate so far. So again, just made a cube, selected it in object mode, changed the inputs under here for subdivisions, width, height, and depth. The next thing we're going to do, space bar for our multi-view. This will make what we're about to do a lot easier. I'm going to go into my top view, and I'm just going to scroll in nice and close, switch into my face selection mode. And so what I want to do is drag across the middle section of this, the middle 25 faces. So I have those selected, but now I have it on both sides actually. So I selected 50 faces. So this is why we were doing it this way. So spacebar, spacebar. So I come over to my front view, and now I'm going to hold Shift to add to my selection. Again, Shift to add to your selection. So I'm going to drag across the middle again and add another 50 faces. So now I have 4 of my 6 sides selected, or through the middle anyway. And then finally, the middle 25 faces on my last remaining sides, hold Shift and drag across the middle. So now you should have 150 faces, yes, selected on your object. Right? So all we need to do now is extrude and use the blue arrow and push it in. And if you push it too far, you will see the back side of the other faces and they will appear as black. So make sure you just don't get it to that point. Okay, I see some questions in the chat. How did you get to show all those faces? I just put the cube. So again, when you get your new cube in the scene, in object mode, you're going to select it under inputs in your channel box along the right. You want to make sure you find your subdivisions, width, height, and depth, and increase this to 7. I'm assuming the question about redoing the faces is about how do you redo the selection of those faces. So again, to show you that, I'm going to press spacebar for my multi-view, spacebar for my top view, hold right click and go to my face selection mode, hold Shift and drag across the middle 25 faces and select those. Spacebar for my multi-view, spacebar for my front view, hold Shift and drag again across the middle 25. Go to this one, and oh, you can't actually see it from this because of my other object, so we're just gonna wing it. How'd I do? Hey! All skill, no luck. So then you get those all selected, and then you do the extrude. Okay. So option dose. Option number 2. So this is the one where we use keep faces together off. So watch this. 2 steps. So I'm going to go into face mode and select all my faces. Actually, it's 3 steps. But then I'm going to extrude. With this one, I'm going to turn keep faces together off. And so you'll notice with it on, my object is going to become black because the extrude basically turned my object inside out. And so what we want to do is turn that off so it doesn't invert your whole object. And then it will also treat each side of the object individually. So now I can click on the scale cube. You'll see the center of my extrude manipulator becomes scale. And I can scale this in. And I again still have the center of those shapes selected. So I can just click the extrude again. And this time I will push them in with the arrow. And now you have this shape. So those are your 2 methods. So again, the first one, you add a bunch of faces and extrude in, like 150 faces. This one, you extrude in and then you extrude in. I still don't know how you select all those squares. You're talking about this one, right? So on this one, here, let me move that over there. So with this, when you have all of these faces, so in your multi-view, make sure you're switching to face mode. Hold shift, and you're going to drag a box across the center 25 faces, and it will select all 25 of those faces. But since you're doing it with a drag selection, it will also get the 25 faces that are equally on the bottom. So you end up selecting 50 faces. So again, spacebar, spacebar, then hold shift, drag across the middle sections again. Would you redo the second method? Of course. Okay. So let's delete that. Got a fresh one here. So again, step 1, in face mode, select all the faces. Step 2, you're going to hit extrude and make sure your extrude is turned to keep faces together off. And then from the extrude manipulator, you tap the scale cube. Just click it once. You'll see the center of the extrude manipulator become the scale tool. And then you can scale from there, and it will scale in all 6 sides of your cubes to be a smaller square. And then you just have to extrude one more time, and this time just move that back and it will push it in. Alright, so let me at least stop this recording.